Hello, and welcome to Solipsist Watched. I'm your host, the Social Solipsist, and this week I watched Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, the 1969 Western film. The reasons why I watched this are, well, they should be obvious to anybody who is a die-hard fan of the channel, because I just finished Kalawara's Gunslinger. So if you haven't watched that, go watch that. Anyway, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, widely regarded as one of the best Western films of all time. An opinion that I will have to strongly disagree with. This film is bizarre. Not without merit, but 1969 is not so old as to excuse some of the strange goings on in this film. So, where do we start? Well, I suppose we should touch on history a little bit. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, real people who existed once upon a time. They lived in an interesting era for a lot of reasons. When people think, well, at least in the United States, there's a lot of mythology that goes into the idea of the Western frontier. And there's a tendency to forget and create a lot of misconceptions about the quote-unquote West, because it's generally painted with very broad strokes, and people tend to forget that it's about 100 years of our history or so, during which the West expanded, had a whole lot of things going on, and not all the cowboys, so to speak, lived at the same time. So Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid lived towards the end of the quote-unquote Western era, that being the tail end of the 20th century, or the tail end of the 19th century, rather, beginning of the 20th century. I believe they died before, spoilers for history. They died, I believe, before the turn of the 20th century. So that puts, well, here's the thing. There's a lot of Western films, and a lot of them don't bother to cover specific individuals, or if they do, they are unbothered by anachronism or anything else. The fact that nobody who cares about this is probably ever going to watch this, but the legacy of John Wayne as an actor, I put that in big air quotes, because John Wayne is a garbage actor who starred in largely garbage movies. The legacy of John Wayne and the American Western has a lot of problems, not the least of which is historical revisionism, and just so many problems that I'm going to try not to get into today. But suffice it to say, credit where it is due, this film does a reasonable job of trying to keep its characters and setting and technology and the like rooted in the era in which it is actually set, and not just sort of paint with a broad stroke about what the West was like. So I think the first real thing I want to talk about is the actors in the film. So the two leads are played by Paul Newman and Robert Redford. And as I don't recall if I've expressed it on this show or not, but I am of the opinion that a lot of quote-unquote good actors, especially in modern times, are not very good actors. They don't have a broad range. They don't have a lot of acting capacity. They basically play themselves and understand how to replicate, basic human emotions and deliver their lines believably. Some of the highest paid actors in Hollywood these days are, I would hardly call them actors, because they basically play themselves. Paul Newman and Robert Redford are good actors, but they do sort of fall into that camp where they mostly sort of play variations on themselves. That said, they do it quite well. That is not my condemnation of the one-note actor is not to say that they are not worth anything. It is merely to say that as their artistic breadth should not be overstated. However, Paul Newman and Robert Redford, in a variety of things that I've seen them in before and in this film as well, do an admirable job of presenting, of being well cast, essentially, for the parts they need to play. Paul Newman plays Butch Cassidy. He's the leader of the bunch. He's charming and doesn't like to get into scraps and likes to talk his way out of things and have ideas. The Sundance Kid likes to shoot people. He's good at it. And he's a bit stoic about the whole thing, but he also has a sentimental side. They both of the actors play the characters very well. Credit also to the variety of supporting actors, including Ted Cassidy, who, if I'm remembering correctly, played Lurch in The Addams Family. He only shows up for a single scene, but he plays it very well. And it's Lurch. You've seen Lurch. Take the makeup off of Lurch. He's still like a very unique looking person. And I don't think enough credit. Not that I've seen a lot of things about this film, but like I've never seen anyone credit him for delivering a good scene. And hey, he does a great job in the one scene that he's in. There's a variety of other supporting characters who all do their jobs well enough. But the two leads are frankly the saving grace of this film. I don't want to say, before I go any further, I don't want to say that this is not worth watching. I think it's worth watching if this is up your alley at all. If for no other reason than the cultural relevance and the historical value of it as a piece of media, as a piece of cinema, I think it's worth watching. However, it has a lot of problems and a lot of bizarre choices. So while the acting is pretty good, the dialogue and the script are the first sign that something's going a little bit awry. It is middling, the dialogue, and the story as a whole is, well, no credit given, basically, because it is historically based. While some artistic liberties are obviously taken, the plot, so to speak, is thin on the ground. And at this point, I'm just going to, quote unquote, spoil the movie, because there's really not a lot to spoil if you know much of anything about the two characters herein. They are, mythical figures in the Old West, not in the Old West, in the late era of the West, the Western frontier. And their history is pretty well known. So this is mostly a character study of a sort. And I hesitate to even say that because I feel like I'm giving it too much credit. the plot can essentially be summarized down to a sentence, which is more or less Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid and their gang rob one too many people, piss them off finally for the last time, get chased out of the United States to Bolivia, where they try and set up a life, struggle for a little while, and eventually get shot. That's it. That's the course of the film. So what do you do with that? Well, there's a lot you could potentially do with that. Unfortunately, this film makes some utterly bizarre choices in how to deliver that story and what portions of it are important or worth filming. Now, I feel like I have to jump into the cinematography and the editing, and then a technical note that I'm probably going to go on a tangent about, but I'm going to try and keep to, well, I could sit here for an hour and talk about the technical side of things, but I'll try and keep it short. The editing is utterly bizarre. There are some great moments in it, but they are surrounded by such strange editing more often than not that I am genuinely confused by it. There is an extensive use of a bunch of different variations of montage that seem entirely out of place, except if there was just a sheer lack of budget. But that doesn't seem to have necessarily been the case, because they still filmed quite a lot to make those montages. So it seems to have been an artistic choice. I don't understand. Especially an early one where it's essentially a musical interlude that goes on for several minutes at a time. Not where they're singing, but where it's footage set to very heavy music that is frankly completely tonally inappropriate, and the scene is completely unconstructive to the narrative as a whole. It's atonal and just baffling. If you've seen the film before, you plan to see it, this is the bike scene. It's just weird. And as I will probably say a number of other times in this, while I admire the attempt to maybe take have a diversion from the sort of grim reality of running from the law, that is not how I would choose to do it. And it is edited in an entirely bizarre way. In addition to the editing, I feel like I need to talk about the cinematography and the shooting in general, and a technical note that is somewhat speculative, but I think important and worth considering, about the time and place in which this was filmed. There are some shots in the film that are quite incredible. Like really good looking shots that were framed really nicely, have just beautiful composition, great lighting, all these other things. Unfortunately, somebody decided that a vast amount of this film should be shot on site in the wilds of a variety of different locations. And it does not work out. There are a lot of shots that are either under or overexposed, have really atrocious lighting, or are just not composed very well. In addition to that, the various chase shots, including montages of they essentially end up being montages of people riding horses, because in 1969, the idea of something like a Steadicam is completely out of the realm of possibility, right? However, what was usually done at the time with things like that, instead of having a follow cam, a Steadicam, something like that, was to set a wide shot and pan across with the motion. However, they use this shockingly sparingly, and it's really to the detriment of the film. There are a couple of notable occasions even where you can literally see, like, cut to cut, they're reusing footage with slight variations in the cuts, as though it's like, oh, they're riding this way, now they're riding that way, now they're riding this way, now they're riding that way. Well, yeah, except for I just watched you play me the same clip twice. And so even if you didn't notice that it's the same clip, there's no visual continuity, or very limited visual continuity, in terms of trying to follow the course of a chase or travel or anything else. It's very strange and really seems almost like it is trying to make up for a lack of footage. However, the film also has the opposite problem, where because they made the choice to shoot on site in the wilds of so many of these places and take all the detriments of not having lighting and all these other things that were normally accounted for in other Western films and other films of the time by shooting mostly on sets where you could control a lot of those things. The side effect of that is that the director and whoever else was involved in making the choices of where and how to shoot clearly didn't want to throw away any footage, because there's lots of extended not even extended shots, because most of the shots are quite short, but they just refuse to cut any out. So again, like, even if it's not intentional, a lot of these extended scenes end up looking like montages, and they're disjointed in how they're presented. And you're like, okay, I can't even follow the terrain that they're riding through. The only sense of continuity is now they're in a dusty area, now they're in a like more grassy area, now they're in a sandy area. Like, that's the best you get. And meanwhile, during these shots, there's never any dialogue being delivered. And again, some of that is a technical limitation of, if you shoot in the wilderness, there's no lav mics and, wireless transceivers in 1969. Well, there are, but we won't get into that. You can't really do that in the way you can these days. But even so, like, that means you have to change the way you compose your scenes, and scene to scene, shot to shot, scene to scene needs to be edited in a way that it maintains interest and like understanding. Instead, you get minutes at a time with no dialogue. And while I'm very pleased with any film that's willing to not have the characters constantly be delivering dialogue, this is a case where that really doesn't work well, because they're being chased. All right, they're gonna say 4 lines a piece in the next 10 minutes, and the shots that are in that 10 minutes are not going to give you a lot. They might even, some of them are pretty, but even then, a lot of them are not. And that gets into the technical side of things. And I'm going to make an attempt here to not go on a 30-minute tangent that amounts to a physics and chemistry lesson. If you are already well versed in cinema and cinematic history and cameras and lenses and film, this is going to be remedial for you. If you're not at all, I'm going to try and do a quick summary. 1969. So if you've watched some old films, you've probably seen some you've probably seen on the film, like in the opening credits or ending credits, something that says something like shot on Panavision. Panavision is a very important company in the history of cinema for a variety of reasons. They originally started out as a lens maker, then they moved to making full cameras. And for a long time, they were the go-to. This film was shot on a Panavision silent reflex. That came out in 1967. Panavision had already been a company for, I want to say 15 years at that point, had been making lenses for a long time, hadn't made that many cameras. The Panavision silent reflex was not one of their earliest cameras, but it had been a few years. It was an update to something they had built before. So here's the thing about film and lenses and Panavision. Panavision is shot anamorphic. That means that when you have a 35 millimeter, it's shot on 35 millimeter film, which has a certain aspect ratio. But the composition of the shot is shot in, trying to avoid technical jargon. It's shot in widescreen. The widescreen is then printed onto film that is not widescreen. Essentially, it compresses, it squishes the image so that it fits on film that is not the same dimensions. There's nothing wrong with this. In fact, if you've ever, there's a whole lot of interesting cinematic history and cinematic artifacts that have come as a result of this historically. However, what's relevant here is that the Panavision silent reflex, the camera used to shoot this film, came out in 1967, 2 years before the film came out. I would speculate that they did not really know what this camera and the film they put in it was capable of and not capable of. And so what you get are a lot of shots that are bizarrely out of focus or have weird lighting, as I mentioned before, or are just inappropriate for the scene. To me, some of this is subjective. I don't know why they use this, view. Especially long shots are not composed very well. They tend to be out of focus. They tend to be distorted. They tend to have a lot of visual artifacts on them from the lenses. And some of that may be related to a lack of understanding of what the film was capable of. With this being 1969 and with it being film, you can't review the film once you've just shot it. It's not modern day, right? So you have to know your camera extremely well. You have to know the camera and the film you put in it extremely well. And you have to have very good tools to assist you in determining things like the shutter speed, the aperture, all these other things that go into shooting on film. Because if you get it wrong, you'll know in 6 months when they develop the film. And you're not going back for reshoots because you shot it you sent your whole team out and shot it on site. And so there's a whole lot of shots that I just wonder if they're bad because the director, the DP, and whoever else may have been involved didn't really know what they were working with yet. For all I know, I should actually go back and, well, I don't know that I necessarily want to watch the film again, but I'd be interested to go back and see if I can figure out if the problem shots are mostly shot by a, the term is escaping me, but a second shooting group that shoots pickups and other things that don't require, the actors, don't require extensive direction. Because that also might explain some of it. But even with all that consideration to the film, the cameras, the director, the shooting, all these other things, it doesn't explain some truly bizarre editing. The montages, extended montages, things where there are a couple of scenes, very extended scenes, like they go on for minutes, where it's just cut, montage of events that are happening that they clearly shot and didn't like, and either they're doing a clip show of very short shots, or they've literally turned it into a single frame montage, like a Ken Burns-esque almost. And it's just so strange. A lot of these are overdubbed with music that, this is the music was composed by Burt Bacharach, who is a name, for better or for worse. So why the music is so bizarre, I don't understand. Why it's implemented in such a bizarre way, I don't understand, especially because much of the film has no soundtrack at all. And I don't know if that's an editing problem or a director's choice or an artistic choice or whatever. But it's very weird. And possibly the weirdest thing is the way the film opens, which is what looks to be probably quite good footage, overdone with this extremely grainy, bad sepia tone filter. And there's no reason for it, because it's not even a flashback. It's not supposed to be being like captured historically by somebody else. It's just the choice that they made of how to intro the film. They could have removed that brown sepia tone, and the film would have gotten better and more legible. I was very concerned because it has such a, not only is it just, it's not just, hey, the tone's changed. It actively is detrimental to the way the film looks. If you've ever seen, for example, like if you just take a regular color photo and just put apply a grayscale effect to it in Photoshop or something like that, you'll know what I mean. You can't shoot sepia or grayscale. You can't, it's a bad idea. I'm not going to say you can't. It's a bad idea to apply that effect as a post-processing effect, because the amount and type of light that you need to let into your camera, digital or otherwise, to compose that nicely is very different. You can't just apply a grayscale or another filter to it and expect that the composition isn't going to go to hell, because it will, I promise you. And I was very concerned that I had that either the quality of the film was really bad or that the copy I had was bad, because of how bad the first couple of minutes look with this sepia tone. Anyway, I'm going to try and back off this my tirade about the technical problems, but it really feeds into the whole composition of the film. So we've talked about the acting, it's decent. We're talking about the dialogue, it's only really saved by the acting. The story and plot is mostly inconsequential. The cinematography is a pretty mixed bag. The costuming is pretty nice. Occasionally, some of the like on-site locations are actually incredible. But usually it's when they bother to stop in a location, not when they're writing through it. The director doesn't seem to know how to shoot moving shots, but also doesn't seem to know how to compose a scene such that you can appreciate not only the action, the movement, the acting going on, the film going on, but also the beauty of the spectacle of the location. They clearly must have spent a lot of money going to these locations to get these shots, and then they really squander it. So, as for the plot itself, I've almost hit all the relevant notes already by virtue of everything else I've talked about. I could talk about what's wrong with individual scenes, or why there's certain melodrama or characters that are overplayed, underplayed, inconsistently played. I would say actually that's probably the biggest sin against the acting is the actors do their damnedest, but the writing is rather inconsistent, and the characterization from scene to scene suffers dramatically as a result, despite the actors' best efforts. Yeah, frankly, I don't understand why this is heralded as such a masterpiece. It frequently shows up on lists as one of the best movies of all time, one of the best movies of the 60s, one of the best Westerns of all time. I don't think it falls into any of those categories. Lots of films that preceded it do everything it does better. It's a film out of time, and I wonder how much of it is just a failure of the hubris of the direction and the expansion of budgeting and filming capabilities. That's really where I end up sort of landing on the whole thing, is that maybe somebody had a great idea and it just didn't come together. Anyway, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, fascinating historical characters, worth reading a little history on if you're interested in that kind of thing. This film, definitely a mess. I didn't even talk about the ending. The ending makes no sense. It's like a nod to Bonnie and Clyde. Wait, when did Bonnie and Clyde come out? Uh, 1967. Yeah, the ending's terrible. I don't know. If Westerns and historical film and historical Westerns are something you're deeply, deeply interested in, I would recommend it with caveats. Otherwise, don't believe the hype. I don't know. Leave your thoughts. If you think I'm an idiot and have completely missed the meaning, the reason for the choices, or I just don't appreciate the artistry, I'm open to hearing your disagreement. But this is a weird one for me. I just don't think it's that good. Anyway, thank you for sticking around for an extended. I don't want to start calling them extended. I've already had one that was 50 minutes. A slightly longer than average so far. Average at this point. A slightly longer episode of Solipsist Watched. Appreciate you hanging out. Let me know your thoughts. Tell me if you watch it, and then tell me your thoughts. And I'll see you guys next time.